This is continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage.
In the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers podcast.
That it is. Let's go to the courtroom for segment number 3 of our continuous coverage on the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell.
Okay, we're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State of Idaho versus Lori Noreen Vallow. We just concluded the lunch recess. Mr. Wood is continuing with direct examination of Dr. Warren. Before we start with continued examination, Mr. Wood, just as a housekeeping issue, in terms of the last set of photographs, they were moved for and admitted in a chronological fashion. I advise that, in fact, certain letters in there were not actually introduced, so that would be 176 W, Z, and KK. Is that
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there will be an instruction given to you later that at times there may be gaps in numbering or lettering. So this would be one such instance where likely if your notes said something was admitted, those 3 were not in the sequence of those photographs. So you don't need to concern yourself with that, but we do need to have that clear on the record so somebody's not looking for those exhibits in the future if they look at the case file. So with that noted, Mr. Wood, if you'd like to continue at this time with direct examination, you may. The court would note all parties are present and the defendant as well, and you can continue to question your witness.
Thank you. And just for clarity of the record, with the next exhibit, I will, as we admit it, there will be a few similar items. So,
okay.
Dr. Warren, when we left, we had briefly discussed your finding of a cause of homicide by unspecified means.
That's correct.
And you were discussing criteria for reaching that conclusion.
Yes.
And just to refresh the memory of the jury and everyone, can you tell us again, what is the criteria for a homicide by unspecified means?
Yes. So I already discussed that this term is used or sometimes used as a cause of death. So that there are specific guidelines and criteria that are used dealing with this cause of death. One, it has to be objectively suspicious circumstances. And examples used for the guidelines are dismembered body, body is burned, body is buried out of sight, and there's some other ones as well, but this case clearly fits number 1. Number 2 would be no findings at autopsy to explain the death. So it gives a couple examples. One is if you have a full body that's intact and you do an autopsy and there's no other cause of death to explain it based on your autopsy. Another example would be that there's not enough of the body present to determine the cause of death by way of autopsy. So that, in this particular case, that would fit number 2. Number 3 would be toxicology. There's no toxicology. That would explain the decedent's death. In this case, the toxicology, I found no drugs or substances that would explain the decedent's death. Number 4 is more on the social / history, including medical records. There's not another reasonable explanation based on medical records, social records, why somebody should be or could be dead. So in this particular case, I felt like this met all the criteria, and that's why I called it as such. Again, it's homicide by unspecified means, meaning I believe, based on everything, that all the circumstances, autopsy, toxicology, all the supporting documents, that this is a homicide. I just can't tell you exactly why. I can't pinpoint it.
Doctor, did you review Tylee Ryan's medical records?
I did.
And in reviewing, what did you find in her medical records in terms of prior illnesses or sicknesses?
So based on the medical records that were available to me, Tylee was documented to have anxiety with panic attacks. She was documented to have ovarian cysts that sometimes caused her pain. She was documented to have pancreatitis or recurrent pancreatitis. In her case, her pancreatitis often flared up when she took antibiotics, but there was, I believe that in the medical records too, there's mention of an possible autoimmune reason for pancreatitis. There's a wide variety of reasons to have pancreatitis. And then also she's known to have mesenteric adenitis, which would also cause her abdominal pain. So mesenteric adenitis is essentially your loops of bowel are held together with adipose tissue. And within that adipose tissue, there's numerous lymph nodes. So typically during a viral infection, your lymph nodes will get inflamed, they'll become enlarged, it'll cause pain. It's usually self-limited. And I believe those were, at least based on the medical records that I reviewed, that was part of her medical history.
Okay, and is there anything in her medical history that would provide a reasonable explanation for her death?
No, not in my opinion.
Okay. As part of your examination of Tylee Ryan, did you collect any evidence to be sent to other labs?
Yes.
What was that?
So I think we already mentioned that I sent skeletal muscle for toxicology, and we already talked about those results. In addition to that, I collected multiple pieces of soft tissue, skeletal muscle, what I thought was liver, and other organs for potential DNA analysis. So you can use blood, you can use tissue samples, and you can potentially get DNA from those sources. There was also a strand of hair in bag number 2. I talked about how there were 3 bags that the remains came in. In bag number 2 of 3, there was a single strand of hair, so we submitted that to law enforcement. And there's also in, I believe, bag number 2, there was a green bucket, a melted green bucket, and that was submitted to law enforcement as evidence as well.
Okay. Dr. Warren, did you, as part of this autopsy, were photographs taken?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be shown State's Exhibit 177A through 177EE. Doctor, can you review State's Exhibit 177A through EE and let me know when you've had a chance to look over it?
Yes. Okay.
Do you recognize State's Exhibits 177A through EE?
Yes.
What are they?
These are photographs taken at the time of the autopsy by our office.
Okay. And you were present during that autopsy?
Yes.
And were some of those photographs even taken under your supervision?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recognize those photographs photographs as true and accurate representations of what you witnessed that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move for admission of States Exhibits 177A through EE into evidence.
Any objection from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, we would object that under Rule 403, these are more prejudicial than probative.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I've considered that objection. The court does need to consider whether or not the probative value of the exhibits is sufficient to overcome any possible inflammatory effect that may be had on the jury. The court does find that there is a probative value that outweighs the inflammatory nature of what these may show. So on grounds of 403, the court determines that the objection is overruled. I'll note, however, though, Mr. Wood, that is with the previous photographs, there are some photographs in here, not all of them, that I would determine in order to minimize the inflammatory effect that they could potentially have should not be displayed on the large projector screen, may be shown on the smaller monitors for the jurors. And for that reason, I think we've already indicated which ones I believed shouldn't be shown on the projector. Apologies for the delay that may create, but we'll need to reconfigure the displays and projectors when we get to that point.
Okay. Is that exhibit admitted?
It is.
Okay. Your Honor, and just for clarity, for the record, if I may now list, there's a few numbers that are not in there.
Okay, so we went A through EE, which I presume is A through Z, then starting with double A through double E.
Yes.
And what is not included in that exhibit?
There is no 177L, 177N, as in November, 177R, 177U, 177W, and 177Y.
Okay. And again, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, don't be concerned necessarily with numbers or lettering. Once you get exhibits, you'll be just instructed to consider all the evidence. So with that, Mr. Wood, you can continue.
Thank you. Your Honor, your clerk did, I think, briefly show us the exhibits you did not want shown on the large screen. I'm wondering if I could get a copy of that so I don't inadvertently...
Okay, the list I've got is D through H of 177 is the first set. If you're going sequentially through or alphabetically through the listing.
We will be.
Okay. Second group then, Mr. Wood, is I believe it's O through CC.
Okay. May I begin to publish and then we'll...
Yes.
Thank you. Doctor, can you describe for the jury what you observed in States Exhibit 177A?
Yes, as I mentioned, the remains came in 3 separate bags. So this is labeled 1 of 3, and you can see there's a red seal through the zippers of the bag. Again, the seal is to preserve evidence.
And was there a number assigned to Tylee Ryan's case or autopsy for your lab?
Yes. Same with JJ. There's a ruler with the case number 200-611-61, and this is the number that was assigned to Tylee's case.
And can you describe what's in State's Exhibit B?
This is simply a close-up of the seal with number 506600, showing that it's intact.
Okay. Can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 177C?
So after we broke the seal and opened the bag, within the body bag, there were large clumps of soft tissue and bone and dirt, and there were also 2 brown paper bags. You can see one of them is labeled with burial site ? And the other bag was unlabeled.
Your Honor, on to 177D.
Okay, for that next set, then I would require that, again, for purposes of not making the exhibits unnecessarily inflammatory, that they not be projected onto the monitor. So, and there are 2 groups. If you want to keep it in order, I guess we'll reconfigure twice to do that, but we'll need to turn off the projector at this point. Okay, we're ready to proceed. Thanks, everyone, for your assistance.
Doctor, can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 177D?
Yes, so we're still on bag 1 of 3. The previous photo showed you the 2 brown paper bags. The rest of what was in the bag is what you see. It's essentially charred remains of clumps of mud and dirt, soft tissue, and bone.
And can you tell the jury what you observed in 177E?
So this is a photograph of what was in that commingled clump of charred tissue. Once we were able to clean off the debris and most of the decomposed tissue, what we have here is on the right side that's not on the blue board. We have to your far left, that's a sacrum with decomposed tissue and blackened charring. And then the other 2 bones, the middle and the right bones, that's the right and left hip bone with a small fragment of femur that's still attached to both of them. And you can still see there is blackened, charred appearance to portions of the bone, and there still is some decomposed tissue that's adherent to the bone. On the blue board with the ruler, on your far left, those are 2 small fragments of small bowel that we found within the commingled remains. Next in line, directly above the sticker that says bag 1 of 3, those are vertebral bodies from the vertebral column. And moving next, the small fragments of tissue. 2 of those are small fragments of essentially unidentified. Not sure where the bone came from, but it's small, probably hand or foot. And then there's some small fragments of cartilage as well. Okay. So that was essentially, this is the cleaned up version of what you just saw in the previous photo.
Doctor, are you aware if any of these items were sent for further testing with the FBI?
Yes, all the skeletal remains were sent to the FBI for a forensic anthropology workup.
Okay. And can you explain what you observed in State's Exhibit 177F?
So this is still bag 1 of 3. This is on your left, right above the ruler with the sticker bag 1 of 3. That was what was determined to be, to the best of my ability, charred and decomposed soft tissue. On the right, the blackened chunks of tissue, chunks of material, that was determined to be, those were charred clumps of mud, just ash and rock.
And can you describe for the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 177G?
All right, so if you remember, we're still on bag 1 of 3. If you remember, the burial site question mark was within bag 1 of 3. And this is what was in the paper bag burial site question mark. You can see it came in a foil container, and there's multiple charred pieces of bone and other debris. You can make out on the far left, those are vertebral bodies. The remainder of the bones were just small, fragmented bones that were charred.
And can you state what you observed, or tell the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 177H?
Yes, so this is the cleaned up version of what you just saw within that container. On the far left are 2 vertebral columns, vertebral bodies that are charred and partially burned away. In the middle, there's those 3 fragments of small bones that have some thermal artifact as well. In the bottom right, that black material, that was determined to be more just charred ash, dirt, twigs, and rock. And then up in the upper right, those are just small fragments of unidentified bone that were charred.
You state what you, Your Honor, I don't know if the court wanted to turn the projector back on, how it wants to do that.
Okay, there are a series of 4 more that can be displayed on the projector. Actually, 3 more. It might be... Mr. Wood, why don't you just keep going, since there's only actually 2 or 3 more that I think shouldn't be on the projector, and then once we get through the rest of that other set, we'll convert things back to normal.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
Can you state for the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 177K?
Yes, so as I mentioned, 3 bags were received. We just went over bag 1 of 3 and the contents of bag 1 of 3, and now we're moving on to the second bag, bag 2 of 3.
Okay. And what did you observe in State's Exhibit 177I?
This is just another photograph of how the body bag was received. Body bag 2 of 3 is a suspected female.
And 177J?
That is the body lock with seal number 506564, just showing that it's intact.
Can you state what you observed in State's Exhibit 177M?
So this is once we broke the seal open the bag, and this is looking at one portion of what we saw within bag 2 of 3. And you can see there are just large masses and large clumps of, at this point it's hard to tell, but you can tell that there is clumps of tissue. You can feel the bone. You can also see, if you can see some green, I'm not sure if you're aware, if you can see that, but on the largest mass of commingled tissue, there's some green discoloration, and that was the green melted bucket that I was talking about.
And just for clarity, Doctor, where I'm pointing my pen, is that part of what you're referencing?
Yes.
And is this part of what you're referencing?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you observe in State's Exhibit 1770?
So this is all also within bag 2 of 3. So you can see there's more black and charred masses of tissue and debris and rock and dirt. And in addition to that, there's 2 brown paper bags. One of them is sealed with white tape. That's the far left bag. And then there's another brown paper bag that's enclosed within a clear plastic bag, and that's at the top of the screen.
And what did you observe in State's Exhibit 177P?
So after sifting and partially cleaning through the debris and the remains, this is a portion of what we found. At the top of the screen, that's the frontal bone, so that's the top of the skull. And you can see semicircular rounding off at the bottom of the skull, so that would be the top of your orbit. So that's where your essentially your eyeballs would be. So it's the top of the head. You can see there's some charring, there's some dirt still on it. Just to your left, on the far left, that's another large fragment and cranium. So that's a large fragment of skull that has significant charring and blackening secondary to the fire. And the most bottom piece of tissue is a portion of the mandible and maxilla. You can still see that there are teeth, if you can recognize it. It's significantly blackened and charred, but there were still some teeth that were intact.
And can you tell the jury what you observed in 177Q?
So as we mentioned before, there were some organs that were identified within that the remains. So this is the heart right in the middle, and then on both sides of the heart are the right and left lung. So they're still attached to one another. You can see the great vessels. They look like straws kind of coming out. So those are some of the great vessels that come off the aorta. And now this is not what a normal heart and lung looks like, just so you know. This is significantly shrunken. The heart and the lungs are both significantly shrunken. They're disrupted, they're charred, they're burned, they're falling apart. And so that was what was found, at least part of the organs that were found.
And what did you observe and do in State's Exhibit 177S?
So again, this is just a little different view, although the tissue, the organs are significantly obscured due to thermal injury and decomposition, you still do your best to try to rule out any kind of disease process or any kind of injury. So right there in the middle, the largest piece, that is the heart. And you can see there's significant charring, there's decomposition, it's kind of falling apart. And then on the right side, that's the right lung that's been sectioned serially. And on the left side, that's the left lung that's been sectioned serially. So again, the lungs are significantly shrunken. The outsides are blackened and charred. And there's thermal artifact within the middle of the organs. Basically, your lung is typically nice and soft. It had become to the point where it was like a very hard sponge.
And what did you observe in State's Exhibit 177T?
So as mentioned earlier, one kidney was identified, and this is that kidney. Very similar to the heart and the lungs. It was extremely shrunken. It was blackened. It was charred. Significant heat thermal artifact. And that's essentially it.
And can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 177V?
So this is bag 2 of 3 after it's been cleaned up. So the organs are not in there, the organs that we just went over, the heart, lungs, and so forth. But these are all the bones that we're able to sift away and clean. As I mentioned earlier, in the top right corner, you can see there's these larger, flatter bones, and that's part of the skull. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a scapula. There's some long bones, including a tibia and fibula from the lower leg. Some of the bones in the middle, right below one of the large skull fragments, there's multiple rib fragments. Just to the left, I don't know if you can see, it's at the very top to the left. It's a sternum with multiple ribs coming off of it. I believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ribs coming off one side and 2 ribs coming off another side.
Doctor, to clarify, is this what you're speaking about, where my pen is pointed?
Yes.
Okay.
And then there are multiple other just black and charred bones that are essentially unrecognizable. And then even further to your left are some smaller hand or foot bones, as well as burnt soft tissue or charred soft tissue in your very upper left. So basically what you're looking at is after a week of sifting through bag 2 of 3 that you saw earlier, those are the bones and the soft tissue that we recovered.
Can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 177X?
So if you remember, there were 2 brown paper bags within bag 2 of 3 as well. So within that paper bag, you can see on the left, there are multiple charred pieces of bone, unrecognizable bone. Most likely at the very top, those small, they look like little logs. Those are likely hand or foot bones. And that was what was in the brown paper bag.
Doctor, can you describe State's Exhibit 177Z?
So that was we've completed bag 2 of 3. Now we're moving on to bag 3 of 3. This is a little different. The first 2 bags came in black body bags that were sealed. This came in a sealed large brown paper bag. And within this brown paper bag, there were 5 smaller paper envelopes that came within this bag 3 of 3.
Mr. Wood, at this point, we can continue to just project these regularly if you'd like going forward.
Sure.
We'll take a moment to reconfigure. While we're doing that, I'll again mention that the victims will have an opportunity, if they wish to view the photographic evidence, I'll allow the state to submit a request and we'll arrange for that.
Thank you.
Doctor, can you describe what's in State's Exhibit 177AA?
Yes, so within bag 3 of 3, as I mentioned, there were 5 other smaller paper bags. This is one of them, and it has identification information, including Fire Pit A Northwest.
Do you recall what was in that bag?
Yes, in this bag, and also moving forth with the 4 other bags, they're essentially just small fragments of unidentifiable charred bone.
You identify State's Exhibit 177BB.
So this was a second bag that was received within bag 3 of 3. It's sealed and labeled with identification information, including Fire Pit B.
Okay, and what was in, you may have already stated it, but just for purposes of clarity for the record, what was in this bag?
So there were small fragments of charred, unrecognizable bone.
Can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 177CC?
Yes, so this is a third bag within bag 3 of 3, again with identification information. I think the description was suspected bone fragment.
Okay. And do you recall what was in it?
Again, small, charred piece of unrecognizable bone. And when I mean unrecognizable, they were bone. I just couldn't say where they came from because they were so small and charred and fragmented.
And State, can you tell the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 177D? I'm
Again,
sorry, let me restate that. 177DD.
So this is a 4th paper bag within the bag 3 of 3, again labeled and sealed with the description suspected bone fragments. And within this bag was also small, charred, crumbly, unrecognizable pieces of bone.
Okay. And can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 177EE?
And this is the final 5th bag that is sealed with identification information and labeled suspected organic matter. So within this bag there was small charred fragments of soft tissue.
Were you able to identify those pieces of tissue?
No.
moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, the state has no further questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wood. Who will be conducting cross?
I will, Judge.
All right, Mr. Thomas, you can commence with your cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Dr. Warren.
Good afternoon.
So it looks like you're a forensic pathologist, correct?
That's correct.
So where did you, I think you said you got your medical degree in Denver?
Correct. The University of Colorado.
Okay. And where did you do your undergraduate work?
I went to Stanford University.
Okay. And when was that?
1998 to 2002.
Okay. Any other postgraduate work other than going to medical school?
Other than, we've already gone over this, but my general pathology residency, neuropathology fellowship, forensic pathology fellowship, and that's it.
Where were those done?
So the general pathology was done at Oregon Health and Sciences University in Portland, Oregon. The neuropathology fellowship was at the same place. I just stayed there for another 2 years. And then for my forensic pathology fellowship, I went back to Denver for the forensic fellowship.
Okay. Now you talked a little bit about forensic pathology and what it is, and I believe you said that in a nutshell you try to figure out why people die. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. You currently work at the Ada County Coroner's Office, right?
Yes.
That's not necessarily that's not an arm of law enforcement, right?
That's correct.
Okay. You're kind of an independent office. You don't work with law enforcement necessarily, right?
I would say I don't work for them, but work with them often.
Okay. All right. And in this particular case, well, I guess when you say you work with them, what does that mean? You are not an independent. You don't look at this case, each body. You don't look at it independently. You kind of look at it with an eye towards law enforcement.
No. So we're our own independent agency, the Ada County Coroner's Office. We perform our own death investigation independent of other agencies. But in case of suspicious cases, homicide cases, we obviously rely upon information. You can't do an autopsy in a black box, right? You can't do it in a basement with no information. So we often rely upon information from law enforcement to help us determine the cause and manner of death.
Okay. And so you say you do somewhere between 200 and 250 autopsies a year?
Correct.
And about 20 of those or 10% of those are homicide or some sort of suspicious circumstances?
Yes.
All right. And the state said that the prosecutor said that you have some sort of a contract with Fremont and Madison County. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you are to determine the cause of death, and they are to determine the manner of death.
That's correct.
Okay. So when you do these suspicious circumstances deaths, do you have any, let me back up, I'll withdraw that portion of it. Do you have any specific training on the collection of evidence that you turn over to the police?
Through my training, yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your training with collection of evidence. Tell me about that.
So during your forensic pathology training, you perform a number of homicides. I think even in fellowship, you're required to do, I believe, at least 20. So during that time, you are, at least in my fellowship, you're trained on how to get nail swabs and fingernail clippings, or getting the clothing off the body, or doing anal, vaginal, oral swabs, and so forth. So it's really just based off experience and doing evidence collection where you get most of your training.
Okay. So you don't have any specific training from law enforcement on how to collect trace evidence?
No.
Okay. Do you know what trace evidence is?
Yes, trace evidence that you can, like a piece of hair.
Okay. That's one example of trace evidence. Okay. And so when you're doing these suspicious death autopsies, I mean, I've done a number of murder cases, and so I kind of know the routine, but I don't know that the jury knows. So why don't you tell me a little bit about who's in the room when you're doing this autopsy? You're not doing it alone. There's obviously a photographer, right?
Correct.
Okay. Who else?
So it really varies. If it's, say, a natural, well, I guess we're talking about suspicious death where law enforcement is there or may be there. Oftentimes, in this case, for example, I was obviously there. There were 3 autopsy technicians from the 80 county's coroner's office who were there, who helped me with the autopsy. There was the prosecutor, Rob Wood, was there on that day. There were 2 Rexburg Police Department detectives that were there. The Fremont County coroner was there, and a Fremont County detective was there.
Okay. And who was in charge of collecting the trace evidence that was found on the body? Was that your job?
Yes. So ever since I've been at Ada County, it's essentially been the role of the forensic pathologist to collect evidence off the body. So say there's a scene and there's a body at a scene. So at that point, it'd be law enforcement is going to collect evidence on the scene. And then once the body gets transported to our office, it has always been the responsibility of the forensic pathologist to collect evidence off the body.
Okay. And once you, is there anybody there, a police officer, a prosecutor, anybody who's saying, hey, I want you to collect that? Or are you just kind of in your zone and they're just there to watch you do your thing?
No, it's a collective. I think it's a team approach. There are certain things that we typically always get. If we can, on suspicious cases, we always try to get fingernail swabs, hand swabs, oral swabs. If there's any kind of sexual anything sexual to the case, we'll get vaginal swabs or anal swabs or penile swabs. We always give the clothing and submit it to law enforcement. But there is also an element of sometimes law enforcement will ask for specific things, like, I want this.
Right.
Can you do that?
I guess in this particular case, that's what I don't want to talk about generalities. I just want to talk about what happened in this particular case, okay?
Right.
So tell me about any conversations you may have had with law enforcement or the prosecutor here, Mr. Wood, or anybody that was in the room as to what they wanted you to gather as far as evidence.
I don't think I can recall exactly what was said. It was 3 years ago.
Right. Was this recorded?
No.
You don't video record?
No.
You don't audio record?
No.
Okay. So it's just your word, whatever happens, Okay. So tell us about what do you remember being directed to collect as far as trace evidence?
So I imagine we had a discussion, and we would say,
Well, I want you to imagine. I want you to focus in on this particular case if you can.
right.
And focus in and say, this is what I remember happening.
Okay, so what I remember happening, talking about what evidence would you like collected, we always collect clothing, fingernails, so I'm sure those are all part of it. And then in this case, there were some other things. We'd obviously want to collect the paper bag and the duct tape and the bag that the body came in with duct tape. So I'm sure all of those things were discussed.
Okay, so you're saying these are things you generally do, and so this is what you probably did, but you don't have any specific recollection of having any conversations with anyone on that particular day about the evidence that was collected.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
Okay. And now, by the time these bodies were collected and brought to you, there were a number of theories going around. What was told to you as far as the background that led you to come up with the cause of death here on JJ Vallow?
For JJ Vallow, we did have a briefing before the autopsy. Met with law enforcement from Rexburg, from Fremont, and there was an individual from the FBI there as well. And I remember I got a timeline of what they knew at that point, kind of leading up to when they disappeared to when they were found. So I essentially got a general guideline or timeline, of the events that had happened up to that point.
Okay. So now you mentioned that Fremont County Sheriff's Office was there, Rexburg Police Department was there, and now you indicate that there was also an FBI agent that was there?
That's correct.
At least one, or more than one?
There's one.
Okay. You don't recall his name or her name?
I don't.
Okay. Male or female, do you know?
It is male.
Okay. So you indicated the cause of death on JJ was, well, I don't want to get this wrong. Why don't you go ahead and tell me what it was?
It was asphyxia by plastic bag over the head and duct tape covering the mouth.
Right. Plastic bag over the head. So tell me what evidence did you collect? Did you collect any evidence inside the sinuses? Did you swab the sinuses and pull out any evidence?
No.
Okay. Did you swab the throat or go down the throat somehow and swab anything down there?
Yes, we took oral swabs.
Okay. And did you find any evidence of microplastics or something that might be consistent with someone being smothered with a plastic bag?
Well, I wouldn't expect to find that, but no, we didn't find anything.
Okay. So how is it that you're coming to the conclusion that this person was smothered with a plastic bag?
Right. So, going back, so JJ was found with a plastic bag over his head. That was duct taped tightly. He was bound. There was evidence of a struggle, and there was no other explanation of why he was dead.
So as a rule out.
I wouldn't consider a rule out because there's a plastic bag over his head.
Okay, but that plastic bag could have been put over his head post-mortem, right?
I guess that's possible.
Okay. But you're saying that your conclusion is that it was done ante-mortem prior
Correct.
to his death.
Correct.
And that's based on nothing concrete, just your theory of the way you think the crime may have happened.
No. I think essentially that's how an autopsy and all the tests, that's why you do all of those things. So if you have a person with a plastic bag over their head and is bound, and you do all the tests and you do the autopsy and you find zero reason for them to be dead, then it's reasonable to conclude that that was the cause of death.
Okay, but let's back up a little bit. When I talked about swabbing the sinuses or swabbing the nasal cavity, you didn't do that?
I've never heard anybody doing that in this type of situation.
Okay, what type of situation are you talking about?
Bag over the head.
Okay, so when someone has a bag over their head and and I'm just going off of things I've seen in movies and whatnot, it seems
That's
like...
scary.
That's scary to you?
Yeah, but you're going off movies.
Okay. So, well, you're going off of
My knowledge.
knowledge. Okay. So when someone puts a bag over their head and they're trying to breathe in air, is that correct?
Yes.
How this happens?
Yes.
Okay. Does anything that's inside that bag, does it generally go inside the nasal cavity or inside the mouth and down the throat?
I've never heard of that.
That's not how it works?
No, not with the plastic bag.
Tell me how it works.
Essentially, the bag is put over your head, and you can't breathe, and then you go unconscious, and you die.
Okay. So nothing goes into the nasal cavity.
I don't know why it would.
What are you breathing in?
Air.
From where?
Nowhere. That's why you die.
From inside the plastic bag?
Correct.
Okay. So anything that may have been inside that plastic bag that was close to the mouth or nose would have gone inside the mouth or nose?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
no.
All right. I guess we'll just have to disagree on that.
Objection, that's not a question.
Sustained.
Will we have to disagree on that?
I guess we will.
All right. Thank you. So you turned JJ from face up to face down, and did you collect any trace evidence that was on his back or his buttocks or his legs?
Yes, we obtained anal swabs.
Okay, but there were no hairs, loose hairs, or anything that, or other swabs other than the anal swabs. Other than that, you didn't take any swabs
No, there was no trace evidence that I found to swab.
that you could see
Correct.
with the naked eye.
Yes.
Okay. The bruising that was on JJ's arms, you indicated that was ante-mortem or prior to his death?
Correct.
Okay. So, how soon prior to the death, or how likely is it that this was done contemporaneously with the death, like at the same time?
That's a good question. So you can't really look at a bruise and date it specifically. They even done tests where you look at it microscopically, and it's not real great. So all I can really say is that the bruising looked recent. It was fresh. It was red-purple within the soft tissues. Usually if it's a healing type bruise, even though he's decomposed within the soft tissues, you'd expect different discoloration, maybe some healing. But it looked recent. So that's all I can really say. I can't say if it was right at the time of his death or shortly prior or how shortly prior, but it looked pretty fresh.
Pretty fresh being within days, right?
Oh, no, I think that's probably a little too far out. Yeah, I mean, I can't say for certain. It was probably right around the time if there was a struggle or shortly before.
So within the day?
Or hours.
Or hours. Thank you. Nothing further.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any redirect from the state, Mr. Wood?
No, Your Honor.
All right, that'll conclude the testimony then of this witness. Can Dr. Warren be excused from any subpoena, or may he be recalled?
I believe he can be released.
Any objection to his release from the defense?
If I could have just a second, Judge.
Yes.
Judge, we may recall him, so we're gonna ask that he not be released from his subpoena at this time.
All right. So, Dr. Warren, then please maintain contact with whoever issued the subpoena while the trial is still pending. You could be recalled. Based on that, I'd also advise you to not view any trial testimony between now and the finish of the trial, just in case you are recalled. With that, you can be excused as a witness for today. So we'll have you step down, but before we do that, I guess it looks like a good time for us to take our mid-afternoon break. So we'll go ahead and take a break, and then will the state be calling another witness after that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Who's your next witness going to be?
Dr. Christensen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood. We'll go ahead and take our break then for 20 minutes.
That wraps up segment number 3. There's more to come in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell on the 26th of April 2023. Stay with us.
This is continuous coverage
Continuous coverage. Continuous coverage.
in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers Podcast.